Good afternoon and welcome to RiskScout's monthly webinar. RiskScout is committed to providing insightful, thought-provoking content to bankers interested in starting and growing new business lines at their financial institutions. We provide a mix of personal and professional development to give you the tools you need to be successful. My name is Amanda and I'll serve as your moderator today. Joining me on the call today is a host of experienced panelists who will be introducing themselves here shortly. Their combined expertise in this area of BSA and high-risk banking should make for a worthwhile webinar. Stay tuned. This month's webinar is titled, Any and All Questions in BSA and High-Risk Banking. Following the webinar, all registrants will receive a link to the recording via email. Our presenters will also leave some time towards the end if you have any other questions. I think that takes care of all our housekeeping items. So now I'll turn it over to Kristen, who will be guiding us through our questionnaire today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kristin Parker. I'm the Director of Compliance here at RiskScout. I have been in banking my whole professional career and with a focus on BSA AML compliance. I'm happy to be here with this panel today. We'll go through their backgrounds here in a minute, but I'm excited to be here. We're going to go through questions we've been receiving. You're welcome to ask any questions, but I'll walk us through that here in just a second about how to go about that. So on today's agenda, we're going to be talking through panelist introductions and backgrounds. We're going to talk about instructions for submitting any questions you may have. We're going to begin our question and answer session. And then on the last couple of slides, I have the panelist contact information. So should you want to follow up further on any answers, or if you think of things that come up after this webinar is over, you can contact us. So let's start with our panelist introductions. I gave you guys just a brief introduction. I think that we should start with Rita up here beside me, our friend Rita. If you want to give us a little bit of your background.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. And thank you for everyone that's attending. I have been in the internal audit and regulatory compliance space for around 20 years. I have my CIA, my CDIA, my CRMA, and a couple other acronyms that justify you being in this industry, right? Prior to working for RAD, I was the AVP of Internal Audit and Stock Fiduciary for CIT before it was purchased by First Citizens Bank. I have about 5 years with the CFPB, 4 years with the DOJ. I've done 2 years with the SEC, and I could keep going on and on and on. But just wanted to give you a little background about myself. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Becky and let her speak about her background as well.
Thank you, Rita. You're a tough act to follow. It's a pleasure to be on a panel with you, Rita. My name is Becky Postar. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer at HDCS, which is Higher Deposit Compliance Solutions. Higher risk deposit compliance solutions, and we are a consulting company that we're under contract with several financial institutions throughout the United States, and we advise them every step of the way with the research and implementation of higher risk compliance programs within their financial institution, primarily focusing on cannabis and crypto compliance programs, including lending programs.
All right, and I guess I'll be last and I guess least, following up on the two of you. My name is Ryan McInerny. I'm the Senior Compliance Manager here at RiskScout. I was formerly with the OCC, in which capacity I worked in mid-sized community bank supervision as well as large bank supervision. So I've been to about 40 or so different institutions from varying asset sizes. I also specialized in Bank Secrecy Act and commercial credit, where I served on committees in the Northeast District and led training across the US. I also have a background in analytics, so I supported the analytics for the most recent Dodd-Frank annual stress testing examination and joined RiskScout in capacity from a consulting strategy product perspective to make a little bit of change outside of the regulatory space.
Great. Thank you, guys. Let's get started here on how to submit a question. So you will see in your GoToWebinar box that you have a little question icon in the corner. If you want to ask a question in that area, I'll be sure to ask it to our panelists here. We can go ahead and get started with a couple questions that have already trickled their way in here. Let's start with this, guys, and I'll let you guys decide who answers what. Let's start with, how can we align our internal committee structure, board of directors, ERM committee being examples, to understand the commercial differences and needs of a high-risk program?
Becky, would you like to take this one, or do you want me to kick this off?
You're more than welcome to kick it off, and I can layer in.
Awesome. The way how you get that buy-in is that it's advantageous to have someone who has commercial lending experience and understands the difference of it. That way they can advocate and get the buy-in of the rest of the committee, along with, it should be a standalone committee that caters to your commercial need. Becky, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, yeah, I think that when it comes to getting boards on boards, it's definitely a part of an education process. And that's one thing that I get to do with my current role, is to have the opportunity to be a part of that education piece for financial institutions that I can help with presentations and education pieces behind what higher risk that you're wanting to consider or implement in your financial institution. And so I think education is the first place to start, and then knowing the next steps of implementation, the research, and ongoing policies and procedures and monitoring of any high risk new industry that you are considering within your financial institution.
Yeah, and one thing I'd just add on that is, I think what I've seen is really beneficial, at least in board meetings or just trying to educate different parties, is considering first off that the board members don't typically come from financial institution backgrounds. So quantifying what the opportunity is and what the cost of actually gaining that opportunity is, whether that be the time to do so or the actual manpower needed for it, is really helpful in their decision-making process.
Perfect, thank you guys. Let's start with another question here, maybe pivot a little bit. How can we develop a target list for our marketing department to prospect high-risk businesses?
I can start off on that. I mean, one beneficial way of trying to get some of those prospects is just leveraging different industry groups. So if there's a type of industry or a type of customer that you might be wanting to target, looking at those actual mailings, those industry groups, putting out advertisements in that, so you can start to get that information out to the people that you want to be speaking to, whether that's geographically, whether that's by a certain type of product offering or other kind of factors.
Yeah, and this is Becky. I think most of the financial institutions that I work with don't openly market to higher risk clients. They like to be very selective. So one of the first places that they start is typically within their own portfolios, and identifying, who that is a great client that could maybe introduce them to other great clients. And also, kind of piggybacking off what Ryan said, is, identifying certain associations locally or nationally where you can meet people individually and see if they're a good fit for your higher risk program.
And Becky, just to follow up on that one, are they not marketing it because you're working a lot with cannabis and they feel they want to be a little bit more hush hush about it for risk averseness, or what are you seeing the trend there?
Yeah, typically a lot of the smaller community financial institutions are still concerned with reputational risk within the their footprint, and so they do like to be a little bit more discreet when implementing the cannabis banking program and identifying clients that they wish to provide services to. And to layer on with that specific industry, it's a very tight-knit industry. So financial institutions find that they don't have to really do any marketing. Word of mouth is a great way to increase and scale up a program in that people will identify to fellow business owners which financial institutions are openly banking the market.
And I've seen, just add on there myself, some institutions that are that have reached out directly to their whoever's the state ran cannabis banking industry itself to say, okay, do you have available lists that you could share that is maybe by industry or industry sector type, growers, processor, retailers, that we could kind of get just an understanding of who's in our market. Not every state organization will share that, but some of them, actually most of them will. So
yes, that's exactly right. That's a really good point.
Rita,
You know, I would like to add on this one too, Kristen. With the clients that we work with at RAD, and when that question comes about, you know, who should we be marketing to? I always start off with who's been asking for the product. Because one thing I always want them to be clear of why they're going this route and why they're offering those services. And if they have someone who's already within their portfolio that's asking for this service, then that's a good place to start as well.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Another question is, I have to revise our policies and procedures for hemp. What have been the most important changes since 2018?
That's a really good question, and there have been several changes this in several different areas when it comes to 2018. Since then, you know, the USDA has finalized their rules, so that helps for states that are following under those rules specifically. And then since then, most states and tribal territories have put in place a USDA approved industrial hemp program within their state, and each state has identified a specific organization within their state that will be overseeing the application process. And so that has changed. There's been several. The DEA has also finalized their rule on their definition of industrial hemp, which I think Kristen could probably agree to. I think there's still a lawsuit pending on that rule, which continues to stand as is. And then we can go into why that's debated. And then, you know, there's been several changes within the FDA as far as they have approved some consumable products. They also, and they're just recently came out with a report saying that they are going to continue to do some more research on whether they can allow CBD to be approved as a supplement for us to be sold as a supplement. So those are some of the changes off the top of my head, but there are some pending things and some lawsuits that could potentially add some additional changes.
Yeah, and I think I would add on there just myself is that, you know, every state may look a little bit different. So you can't blanket statement, you know, certain rules, like let's just say Delta 8, for instance. You know, I live in North Carolina, and there's nothing stated in North Carolina against Delta 8. But in other states there are that they don't allow it. So it's just really drilling down and understanding the rules of the states that you're operating in, or partnering with someone that can really help you understand those rules. You know, because while we're kind of settling down on states changing the rules of what they allow and don't allow, it's still a nimble industry that is subject to change. So you need to make sure that you have a subject matter expert or partner with one to help you kind of stay abreast of that. So when important things that may be relevant to your program change, that you know right away, and you aren't just going on an annual basis and saying, oh no, I didn't know that was illegal. I've let 20 people on board that do that.
That's a really good point, Kristen, because there was that recent ruling that agreed with the fact that Delta 8 is considered federally legal, but there are states that don't allow for the sales of that. So that is correct. And also, like, I live in the state of Texas, so I know currently smokable hemp is not legal as far as this week. That changes, but yeah, you are 100% correct that each state has their own little nuances about what's legal and what's illegal.
I think one big takeaway would be that it is legal, and we still run into banks that say we can't bank that, it's not legal. So just take that away from today, that hemp has been legal since December 2018. And if you take the time to learn about it and learn about even the people in your own, a lot of times people say, well, it is legal, but we don't have anybody that does that around here yet. They have 3,000 licenses in their own backyard that they could be banking. So I think it's important just to really understand the community that you're banking and who's there to see where the opportunity lies.
And you're exactly right, because even though, the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill did remove industrial hemp specifically from Schedule 1, it's still considered a higher risk client for financial institutions for money laundering. So you definitely still want to do some enhanced due diligence and some ongoing monitoring with those clients.
Sure, certainly. And it's definitely not, I don't want you guys to leave here thinking that you can just go and do what you want because it is legal. It's still a different commodity, right? It still is higher risk. So there are due diligence efforts that have to be made that are different than just saying, oh, it's not just another restaurant that's opened, So, all right, let's move on here. Another question that's come in is, while education is important for a board, do you have any recommendations on how to first approach your board of directors with the idea of entering into the hemp or cannabis banking market?
Okay, so that one is a really good question. And Ryan mentioned something earlier that that is a good example of how to approach this, is knowing what your board of directors background is, like what their careers are. You might have some that are lawyers that are on your board, and or other professions that could help you brainstorm how to best start the education, the conversation process. But one of the ones that we've been talking about most recently is, I hear in the cannabis industry that the cannabis industry has a banking problem, and I kind of flip that in, the banking industry has a cannabis problem, in that out of the $25 billion that the legal market in the United States generated in sales, a majority of that ran through the financial system. And so if your board isn't talking about how to monitor whether you want to bank the industry or don't want to bank the industry, you need to be having the conversation and making sure that your policies and procedures are worded correctly, where you don't box your financial institution into a regulatory issue. So if you've got some lawyers on your board, that's a great way to start, is, what is the wording within your policy about a federally illegal business, and specifically medical or recreational cannabis, whatever is legal in your state.
Yeah, those are great points. And one thing that Chris and I have talked about in the past is just thinking about what the mission statement is typically for a lot of community financial institutions or other financial institutions, is to serve their local community and serve the individuals that actually come to their financial institution. And when you look at cannabis in general, it can create some level of public safety concern, but there's a lot of cash out in the streets in that area. And these are people that, if there was some guidance from a federal perspective, could otherwise be served by more financial institutions, but until then, they're in need. And so when you start to think about strategy, you start to think about what the mission of the financial institution is, bringing that forward to the board, senior management, saying, we really should be serving these people. Here's the opportunity. Here's how we can do it. But it's something that we should be doing.
Yeah. Rita, anything there?
The only thing that comes to my mind, Ryan and Becky, you guys hit it spot on. I know every time we're building out a program for a depository in regards to cannabis, the board always wants a ROI. They want to know how they're going to make money on it. It never fails. We have to do a 1 to 3 year forecast, and we have to do the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the board really wants to see the numbers. And I can tell you in about 6 out of 10 cases, that was what swayed the opinion of the board that I've seen in my experience.
Yeah, we actually see that quite a bit too here. That's always, and it's understandable. It's also important to, important to remember that they really need to understand that you can't do it manually, right? That a manual program is not scalable or sustainable. And so and the other thing is if you have one customer in this space, you have to have a program in place, right? You have to have a policy, you have to have a procedure about how you're handling things. Is it worth it to you to go through those motions and that effort of building that for the risk of having one client? Probably not, unless it's a really, really large client. It's if it's not scalable, the risk is really never worth the reward, right? In that perspective.
I second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth that motion. I would never recommend for someone to have a manual process when taking on cannabis or hemp. I do recommend them have some type of system support when they're bringing on those products.
Certainly. Another question that's come in is, do I treat an on-site inspection for hemp just like I do any other agricultural due diligence process?
No. No, you don't. There's different regulations and different parameters that are applicable to hemp. So it may have some similarities, but you don't treat it the same. I think Becky might be able to second me on that one as well.
100%. That is correct. There are going to be some similarities. I do agree with that. And then you do want to create a specific site visit audit for hemp cultivators or other hemp businesses, depending on the type of business. So you'd want to have a different site visit audit for a transporter than you would a cultivator, but you do want to have a very specific site visit audit that that they're conforming to not only the USDA rules, but also the state rules. And if there's anything that varies within your municipality, you want to make sure that your hemp-related business is honoring those rules.
What are you guys seeing in regards to trends for site visits? Is it prior to onboarding? Is it annually here after they've onboarded? Or is it just vary from state to state, institution to institution?
So I can speak from the municipality and from the financial institution. So with RAD, we service both. For the municipality, there is the annual renewal or opening application, and they're fine with that. For the financial institutions, I've seen a mixed bag. We have some clients that the operator is in the process of getting the license, so they're not really approved, but they're pending approval, and they open the account and we do the on-site before it's actually activated. Then I've seen some situations where it's a licensed operator and they want us to go after. So I've seen a mixed bag, and it really depends on the appetite of the financial institution. Some are willing to risk it and some are not.
Yeah, I agree with that. Most, Rita's exactly right when it comes to, depending on the bank's risk appetite, but also, where the client is within the licensing. Are they waiting to get approval? So therefore, there's really nothing to go visit. So you'd want to wait until that client is operational before you did the site visit. And then I definitely think at least annually for a site visit audit, whether it's hemp or cannabis. And if you ever have a client that's had a red flag, you probably want to frequent them a little bit more often until everything is where it needs to be to comfortably move forward.
Ryan, from a regulatory standpoint, would you say that, it's reasonable that the institution comes up with their own methodology behind that?
Yeah, I'd say, with any program that any financial institution is putting together, as long as it's reasonable, achievable, meets kind of the regulatory minimums that we'd expect, whether those are the USDA rules, whether those are different federal guidelines that might be coming out or municipal guidelines. But if it has the bones to meet the regulatory minimums and it's actually giving you the information you need to make risk decisions, to mitigate risk, to decide whether or not you're comfortable continuing with a client or you need to change the strategy. To Becky's point, if there's something that changes the risk level of that customer, whether it be a red flag or otherwise, that you're able to react to that and do something about it, then whatever your methodology is going to be acceptable.
Another thing I'd like to suggest too for financial institutions to make sure in their documentation that random non-scheduled site visits are also going to be something that the client will have to comply with.
Yeah, so I can probably speak for a lot of bankers here in the fact that I started a hemp banking program in April 2019. So there was no regulatory guidance back then, no memos, just flying by the seat of our pants, talking with the regulators about it. And they required a site visit before onboarding and annually hereafter. And I know a lot of bankers are probably thinking what I did back then, which was, well, what am I supposed to be looking for? I'm just a BSA officer, right? Like, I don't know, what hemp looks like versus THC, those kind of things. Do you guys have any pointers as to how you would address those concerns from a banker? Maybe, what tips they could know to look for or who they could potentially partner with?
So how I tackled this is I read the law, the specific law that's for the state and for the USDA, and you can create a site visit audit based on what is required by the law. And you can outline that at first and look at everything that's required, and as a bank decide through your policies and procedures what your financial institution is going to be responsible for monitoring and what maybe necessarily isn't something that you want to monitor, because you could make it as detailed as you want to. With hemp, there is a little bit more guidance, but as we don't have safe banking, we still don't have federal guidance. So we are doing our best guesstimation at the most conservative level of what will be required. So I'm pretty sure our site visit audits are a little too conservative right now, but there are some things that are required by local laws, local states that the financial institution has deemed, okay, even though the state's requiring this to be done, that's not necessarily something that the financial institution will be obligated to make sure is being followed by the customer. So it's a determination based on what you can reasonably expect from regulation, as we do have regulation on what a higher risk client is, and monitoring around that higher risk. And so, and then layering in what guidance we do have and what laws and regulations we have, we can piece together what, as a financial institution, we want to be monitoring, and then layer that into your policies and procedures.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, Becky, is like, I think we want everybody to take away that it's not your job to police the industry, right? They have their own regulatory policing that happens with them. We just need to confirm that the business is there, it is operational, that they are, whatever your institution decides is necessary. But I wouldn't go into a 4, 5, 6 page site visit necessarily, because it's not your job to make sure that their clock is lined up to be exactly no more than 1 minute, or one minute ahead, or 1 minute before the actual real time registered time of the United States. I've seen site visits go that deep, and it's like, well, what if it is? How does it affect your institution? So I think there's a
and
balance.
Kristen, this one, Becky is totally right, and I agree with you as well. But what happens when you run into a staffing issue? And what happens when you run into a banker who's wild by the weed? You got some people that go on a site visit and they're just astonished and they forget about the checklist. Or you got a small community bank that has a department of one. Well, you also have the option of outsourcing those on-site visits to other companies as well. So always keep that in mind, that you can outsource it if you're unable to attain it in-house.
And
Exactly. Oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, that's just really important, especially if you've got institutions, again, that are small staffing, but then those that bank nationwide too. They don't want to be sending. When I had the hemp program, we were banking nationwide. I was in North Carolina. I was going out to California to go do site visits. I had no business doing that. I had a BSA department to run. So I mean, back then those didn't exist, but they do now. And
yeah, I mean, that's a battle cry we hear from our clients. And like I said, that's a service that we provide here at RAT. But it's, right now we're running into the Great Resignation and everybody's running lean. So sometimes you may not have the staffing or the bandwidth to actually leave your location, drive to one facility that's probably 2 hours away, drive back for another one that's 30 minutes away, then go to another one 4 hours away. That takes away from your day job, right? So I always want to let people know those options of resources are out there.
Certainly. So moving on from that, one question that's come in is, are marijuana seeds actually marijuana or hemp? How do I know how to treat them, and what category do they fall under?
Okay, that's a really good question. And most states regulate this. So there is some ruling in the USA when it comes to hemp, but I've noticed that most states that have a USDA state approved hemp program do define which seeds are allowable, including a lot of things like pesticides and all that. And so when it comes to full THC, that is regulated as well, typically as far as preferences, because you can't really do, when it comes to cannabis, you can't do interstate. When it comes to hemp, you can potentially purchase hemp from a different state, but a lot of states will define what's allowable and what's not, and some don't. But I believe the USDA has some guidance on that, although a little vague.
Yeah, and on the DEA actually recently came out with they had to make a ruling based on another case that came out and said, as long as it, regardless whether it's going to be grown to be THC cannabis or marijuana, as long as that seed starts out at 0.3% or less THC, it's considered hemp. So my suggestion would be having those conversations with your client or your prospect to say, you know, what category does this fall in? Get proof of that. Have them sign attestations if that's what their intent is, and then you're able to determine whether or not you actually even need to treat them as potentially a THC cannabis customer, or do they fall actually into the hemp category. All right. Why can CBD not be sold as a supplement, and why should I care as a bank?
So that's a really good question, and there's a lot of nuances, and this is why hemp related clients are still considered high risk. And for several reasons. I mentioned this a little bit earlier about how the FDA has talked about how they're going to look into this again very recently, though the overall expectation is that nothing will happen that will change it. But the way the FDA laws are written when it comes to drugs is the FDA has approved one drug that does have CBD in it, and that is an epilepsy drug for pediatrics. And because there is an approved drug by the FDA, that drug cannot be in food consumed by humans or animals. So that is a technicality, a legal technicality, and there are bills in the House and in the Senate that are trying to solve for that. But right now, it's one of those things that the FDA is trying to do what they can do to get the research, although we've just now been able to begin researching a lot of THC, CBD products on the human body. So they need some time, but I know that they are working on either classifying it as some kind of scheduled drug, or if it can be sold as just as a supplement that does not need FDA approval for consumption.
And I also think it's important to point out that different states, while that's a federal rule, some states have just decided to go on their own and say it's okay. I think one of them is New York. There's a handful of other states that have stuff written. It's also a risk-based decision whether your institution decides that it's okay or not. Like, what's the true risk if we allow our client here to sell some gummies or other supplements? Some institutions, they say that's an absolute no-no, and then other institutions say, what's the worst that could happen here? It's a deposit relationship. I'm not lending to them. That's not their collateral. The worst that could happen here is maybe we lose this deposit relationship should the hammer come down on them and they, you know, lose their business.
Exactly right. And the FDA doesn't really have, a policing unit. They, where someone will come out and, destroy things. They can issue warning letters. So the main thing that we advise is just to review the labeling. If it's, like Kristen alluded to, if it's, a large customer, you want to do some monitoring if you choose to go forward, and just making sure the labels don't provide any false claims, I think is a really safe place to be.
Certainly.
Probably not the right word, but less mitigating some risks, I guess, is the right word, the right phrase.
Anybody else want to add anything there?
No, I'd say you guys covered it. Very comprehensive.
That's just how we roll. Okay, here's a good one. I don't bank marijuana, so why should I care about learning anything about it?
Well, I think this one, again, good question. One of the examples I usually use on this is if you want to be building a plane as you're falling out of the sky, or if you'd like to build the plane before you take off on a runway. And with the marijuana industry, there's so many different types of customers. I mean, you have the traditional breakout of 3 tiers, whether that's plant touching, indirect, or ancillary to the industry. So you can figure out who you'd be comfortable banking, who you wouldn't be comfortable banking if and when somebody does come and request that from you. I know some of the kind of the contingency exercises that I've seen people doing is, okay, well, what happens if a board member comes and asks about this? What happens if it's a customer we can't really turn away? How would we be able to support it, and what is actually going into the industry? So having that education and that knowledge prior to actually being put in the situation is going to put you a step ahead of the rest in terms of your planning and your ability to respond to the request.
Yeah, and that's really well said. I think those are solid points. And to layer in on that, like I mentioned earlier, you know, the cannabis industry claims they have a banking problem, but the banking industry has a cannabis problem. So if your financial institution is in a state that has some form of legalized sales or borders one that does, the odds are that that money's flowing through a financial institution, and how you identify and monitor that is very important. So if safe banking were to pass, or there is some federal legalization that happens and the guidelines are written, there will be a time in the near future where your financial institution will have to will be obligated to demonstrate to your regulators how you're monitoring or detecting whether you choose to bank the industry or choose not to bank the industry.
Yes. Rita, you want to add anything there, or you good?
The only thing I like to tell institutions is be prepared. I can say cannabis will be approved. We just need to, wait for the win. But I know once it's approved, the floodgates will open, and people who are prepared will be ready to take on that business. So even if you're not in marijuana now, you may be ready, wanting to be in it when it's approved, and you don't want to start building it at that time. You want to be prepared prior.
And Rita, that is a full circle moment, because that kind of goes back to what we're talking about with educating your board. Just having that conversation and saying, we need to be prepared with what our decision is and how we're going to go forward with that.
And I think we just need to, address the elephant in the room that there are a lot of people who don't want to make marijuana because they are personally opposed to that. And then that's okay. Everybody is entitled to their opinions. But you have an obligation as a banker to understand that you have to separate those two, your personal feelings sometimes from, the needs of your community and your bank's strategic goals. And so sometimes we're kind of pulling people through begrudgingly through wanting to learn about this, but it's just like what we're seeing with crypto, right? We have so many bankers that how many years have we had to learn about crypto, and how many bankers do we have come to us now that are like, I wish I would have paid attention back then. So you don't want to be the one banker who's left behind and said, well, I didn't want to do anything with it because I don't believe in it. That you want to be somebody who's identifying the risks and helping your institution navigate how they're going to either bank or not bank the industry.
I agree. Right now, we have a lot of clients that we are building out the program. Even if they're not going to execute it, they just want to have it ready. I'm pretty sure, Becky, you're seeing the same thing too, that interest, right, of just being prepared.
100%. I mean, that's the majority of the conversations, because out of, the 12,000 financial institutions there are in the United States, there's only, according to the last FinCEN report, 700, less than 800 financial institutions that are filing the Sars, and then less than 20% of those were terminations. So we don't have a whole lot of financial institutions that are participating right now, but there are a lot having the conversation. You're 100% right.
Next on the list is, can you recommend any good research sites to find out if ACH deposits are coming from a legitimate source, because we have some issues with Bitcoin deposits and other cyber currency.
Yeah, contact Nacha directly. They're an open book. They will talk to you. To be honest with you. Yeah.
Good. All right.
Another thing to check there is the exchange from which it might be coming from, because what the FBI will do is they'll sanction specific exchanges, and then that's a good one to check into.
Great. I think we've already addressed this one somewhat, but if anybody has anything to add here, can we accommodate one-off cannabis relationships and not have to build a full banking program?
No. Once you take one, you're in cannabis. You need a program. You can't do a one-off. No.
Right, and why take on all of that regulatory scrutiny without any reward? So scaling a program is definitely something that should be considered, because having the one client, now you have all this expertise and knowledge on how to detect, monitor, and report. You might as well have the fun of making it a profitable line of business. Definitely not gouging, but definitely making it worth the risks. And that's one thing that we talked about earlier when it comes to the board. You know, I talk about how I have two different tiers of individuals that I talk to in the bank, and there's the executive management and the board of directors, where we talk about profit and what a scalable program can look like for different areas within the call report. And then the other one is, you know, the compliance team, where we focus on how to protect the financial industries, the financial institutions. So there are, but they both align in that why take on the risk if it's not going to be a rewarding program?
Yeah, I think it's that the question is kind of a misnomer, because in order to accommodate the one-off relationship, you basically have to build the program to do so. You need to understand the space. You need to understand how you'd be reporting on it, analyzing that information, and whether you choose not to or choose to go further and bank more customers or look for more members, something along those lines, you've already done the work to build the program to actually accommodate them. So it's I kind of compare the question to, can I walk to work? I could, but I really don't want to, because it's Texas and it's a little warm for my taste.
Next in line is, do I have to file Sars on all cannabis related businesses or just plant touching businesses? That could be a loaded question.
Yeah, we need another hour, Kristen.
I can say from my experience, and we just cleaned up one of our clients that got hit with some FDIC findings in regards to their cannabis program, and they came after them through BSA. And from what the FDIC informed us during that examination was, yes, you are for all, not just for one, not just for some, not just for plant touching. They want you to report for all. That's what we got out of that examination with them.
And it's interesting because there's different states that have come out with their own kind of internal guidance, out state regulatory agencies that have said opposite of that. And then if you read the MRB guidance from FinCEN, it talks about direct plant touching or somewhere around that language. So I think we can sum it up with, you need to talk to your.
It depends on who you get, because we were very thrown off because the client was only doing plant touching, and they were like, no, all of them. And we were like, do you understand the workload? And they were like, we understand, but it's the risk you take with banking cannabis.
But I think if you hear that comment, it's you don't want to upset your regulator necessarily, but I think it's always worth getting other opinions too, from, say, because we hear it all over the board, and your regulator at the end of the day is who's going to be writing a report card and you want to be on the same page as them. So unfortunately, there's not a direct statement from FinCEN that says A or B that you need to adopt
No.
your.
It
Exactly.
doesn't. It doesn't.
And to piggyback,
Ryan,
that's why.
Becky,
Oh,
what do
sorry.
you guys? That's okay. Ryan, Becky, what do you guys think on this? Because honestly, it's not clear.
Yeah, so what we advise and what we do is after we've gone through the risk assessment and I have a full understanding of the financial institution's risk appetite, we take a first stab at policies and procedures, and then we formulate a letter for the financial institution's regulators, and they submit that for feedback and ultimately to obtain a non-objection, because there is no guidance written currently on cannabis banking. Regulators can't really say yes. They can definitely say no, but what we look for is a non-objection.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's just that communication with the regulator and trying to bring what you're thinking forward to them and seeing if there's a problem with it. And to Becky's point, if they don't say no, that's definitely a step in the right direction. I mean, one of the problems is the regulators, they don't have formal training on this for the most part. So you are getting a variety of kind of personal viewpoints and their own learning from maybe their office or a more general area that they've been talking to. So we're going to get different results from different examinations, from different geographies, which can be relatively frustrating when you're trying to have consistency in these programs.
Yeah, good points. Good
I agree
points.
with you, Ryan. Yes, you're right on that, Ryan. Definitely.
All right, the big question here: what's the status of the Safe Banking Act?
Yeah, I like to say predicting what's going to happen in U.S. Congress is as easy as predicting who's going to win March Madness.
Yes, true.
I feel like the statistics are probably close. So right now, it sits in the Senate and it has the bipartisan support. If it were to get introduced, it would pass and get signed into law. So there's several political reasons why that isn't happening, because there are a lot of people in the cannabis industry that do want to hold out for broader social reform, which I think we all can pretty much agree with that. But I don't know why we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So where it stands right now, the Senate has gotten the most pressure I've ever seen in the last 60 days from several associations and entities throughout the United States, backed by almost every state and DC. So there is the most pressure I've ever seen. So I would say 90 days ago, I would say there was almost 0% chance that bill would get introduced, but there are talks happening about possibly layering in some social equity into the safe banking and making it closer to a win-win. That's what I know so far.
Anybody else got any other scoop?
No, I know the same thing, Becky.
Yeah, it's really a guessing game. I mean, it's we've been to this point before, so hopefully things look a little bit different this time, but I don't usually get my hopes up on things getting through legislation.
When people call me and say it's gone to the, it passed in the House, and I'm like, yeah, for the 7th, 8th time. Call me when the Senate picks it up, right? So I guess that leads into this, probably one of the last questions here, which is, what is the likelihood of marijuana legalization actually passing this year?
I don't know about this year, but I do know it will pass.
Yeah, I think at some point we're expecting legalization, but in terms of the likelihood it passes this year, I mean, there might be a sports book or a casino that has the odds on that, and you could probably get a pretty good payout if you get it right.
And then I think we could probably wrap it up on this question because it might be a little long-winded. We can keep it short, but why do I need, or what do I need to know about crypto compliance as a bank?
Yeah, so when it comes to crypto, there's essentially 3 categories that a customer could be according to FinCEN. So there's the customer could be an administrator, someone that takes coins into or out of service, an exchanger, someone that takes cryptocurrency and exchanges it for other stores of value, whether that's fiat currency or some other value store. And lastly, a user, which would just be someone that's using crypto for maybe a payment or the purchase of goods. And so when you're looking at those first 2, administrators and exchangers, those are typically going to be considered a money service business or a money transmitter in that case. So putting them through the same money service workflow and that sort of analysis is going to be the important part on that. The users, knowing that they're in the crypto space and kind of monitor them maybe at a little bit of a higher risk level, aren't actually going to fall into some of that more complex FinCEN regulation for money transmission.
I agree with that, and there are some pretty good crypto banking certifications out there that help you make, I say you, like help a bank, whether you're management or part of the compliance team, help you make a educated decision on how you want to move forward with some detection and monitoring and reporting, and will also help you with what guidance is out there right now, and will probably also point to what can be expected to come, and that is quickly changing.
Indeed. Well, I think that pretty much takes us up to the hour. On the last slides of this deck, I've got everybody's contact information, and we'll send this out. So if you have any follow-up questions you'd like to ask specifically to anybody, you're welcome to do that. Amanda?
Yes, I know we're actually right at the end of the time, but we do just have one more question. If one of you would like to answer it, that just came in right now, and it is, what is the most pressing area that a bank should address first, cannabis or crypto?
Yes.
What are your clients asking for? Do you have clients asking about crypto, or do you have them asking about cannabis? I think you need to go with what's being requested.
I think really one of the biggest things you could look at is obviously what your customers are looking for. I think Rita gives a great answer with that. And then the second would be whatever your monitoring process is for kind of identifying what's already in your institution. If you can do something along those lines and you find that maybe there's more crypto, maybe there's more cannabis, whatever is more relevant to you, what poses the higher risk or the greater opportunity.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you all for your insights. Well, that reaches our end of time. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you, Ryan, Becky, Rita, for your insights, for your feedback, for answering these questions. And it looks like we are out of time. So as a reminder to all our attendees, all registrants will receive a link to the recording via email. And we'd also like to take this time to just thank you on behalf of RiskScout for joining us today. We do hope that you will join us in any future webinars. And please remember that where others see risk, we see opportunity. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.